You always forget your glasses, Mom. Those 6 words destroyed 47 years of motherhood in an instant. The way my son Daniel said it, with that tired sigh, that eye roll, that look of pure annoyance, made me feel like I was nothing more than a burden he had to endure. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me continue opening my heart like this. My name is Margaret, and I'm 71 years old. I live in a small ranch house in Bakersfield, California, where the winter mornings are crisp and the silence stretches longer than it should. That Tuesday started like any other. Me in my faded blue cardigan, the one with tiny pills of fabric that I'd been meaning to fix for months, shuffling around my kitchen in worn slippers that had molded perfectly to my feet over the years. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the cinnamon rolls I'd baked the night before, hoping Daniel might stop by. I'd wrapped them in foil and placed them on the counter, next to the ceramic cookie jar shaped like a rooster that Daniel had given me for Mother's Day 15 years ago. Back then, he'd hugged me tight and said, "Every time you see this, think of how much I love you, Mom." I was squinting at the tea boxes in my cabinet, trying to read the labels without my reading glasses, when I heard his car pull into the driveway. My heart did that little skip it always did when he visited, which wasn't often anymore. Maybe twice a month if I was lucky. Usually when he needed something. Daniel walked in without knocking, as he always did. He was 43 now, tall and lean like his father had been, but his face carried a permanent expression of being somewhere else. Somewhere more important. His expensive navy suit was wrinkled from sitting in traffic, and he kept checking his phone every few seconds like he was waiting for an escape route. "Hi, Mom," he said, barely looking at me as he headed straight for the refrigerator. "Just need to grab some water before my next meeting." I watched him move through my kitchen like a stranger, opening cabinets I'd organized 1,000 times, searching for glasses in places I'd never kept them. This was the boy I'd rocked to sleep every night for 6 years after his father died. The child I'd worked double shifts at the diner to buy school clothes for. The teenager I'd stayed up with during his panic attacks before big tests. "Let me make you some tea," I offered, reaching for the cabinet above the stove where I kept the mugs. "I have that chamomile you used to like." That's when it happened. I was stretching up to reach the blue mug, his favorite one from childhood, the one with the faded superhero logo, when I realized I couldn't quite make out which mug was which. The shapes blurred together, and I found myself squinting, leaning closer to the shelf. Daniel let out this long, exasperated sigh. "Mom, you always forget your glasses." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, they weren't, not really, but because of everything they represented. The dismissiveness, the impatience, the way he looked at me in that moment, like I was some doddering old woman who couldn't manage the simplest tasks. He didn't see the woman who had memorized every inch of his face as a baby, who had kissed every scraped knee, celebrated every small victory, sacrificed every personal dream so he could have his. He saw an inconvenience, a forgettable old lady who misplaced her glasses. "I don't forget them," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I put them down somewhere But he was already back on his phone, tapping away at something infinitely more important than his mother's explanation. I stood there in my own kitchen, holding that blue mug, feeling smaller than I had in years. The morning light streaming through the window above the sink caught the dust motes floating in the air, and I remembered how Daniel used to try to catch them when he was little, standing on a chair at this very counter, reaching up with his chubby fingers and giggling when they slipped away. "I should go," he said, pocketing his phone. "Amanda's got book club tonight, and I promised I'd be home early to help with Emma's science project." Emma, my granddaughter. 8 years old, with Daniel's dark hair and my late husband's gentle eyes. I hadn't seen her in 3 weeks, not since that awkward dinner where she'd been glued to her tablet while Amanda made pointed comments about screen time boundaries and maintaining structure. "Tell Emma I said hello," I managed, setting the mug down carefully, "and that I finished the scarf I was knitting for her." "Sure, Mom. Thanks for the water." He was already halfway to the door when I called out, "Daniel?" He paused, hand on the doorknob, and for a moment I thought about asking him to stay just a little longer, to sit with me for 10 more minutes, to ask me how I was doing. how I'd been sleeping, if I was lonely in this house that suddenly felt too big for just one person. Instead, I said, "Drive safely." The door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through the entire house. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after he left, staring at the cinnamon rolls I'd baked for him, still wrapped in foil, still untouched. The ceramic rooster watched me from the counter, and I could swear his painted eyes looked sadder than they had that morning. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried for the first time in months. Not the gentle tears of missing my husband, but the raw, ugly crying of someone who just realized they'd become invisible to the person they loved most in the world. I looked at the framed photo on my nightstand. Daniel's first day of kindergarten, his small hand clutching mine as we walked up the school steps. He'd been so nervous, so dependent on me then. "Don't leave me, Mommy," he'd whispered. "I need you." When had I stopped being needed? When had I become just another item on his to-do list, somewhere between grocery shopping and getting his oil changed? I picked up the photo and traced his young face with my finger, remembering how he used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, how he'd beg me to read just one more story at bedtime, how he'd made me a coupon book for Mother's Day when he was 12, little hand-drawn certificates for one free hug and one day without chores, and one special day just for Mom. Where was that boy now? What had I done wrong? The questions swirled in my mind as I lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around me. The same house where I'd raised him, where I'd taught him to ride a bike in the backyard, where I'd bandaged his wounds and helped him with homework and celebrated every milestone. Now it felt like a museum of memories that only mattered to me. I pulled the covers up to my chin and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself remembering every small slight, every canceled plan, every time he'd made me feel like I was asking for too much when all I wanted was to be part of his life. The glasses comment played on repeat in my mind, and I realized it wasn't really about the glasses at all. It was about being seen as someone who was forgetting, failing, fading away, someone who had become more trouble than she was worth. But I wasn't forgetting. I remembered everything, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of pure joy and overwhelming love. I just didn't matter anymore, and that realization cut deeper than any words ever could. The next morning, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at the wall of photographs I'd carefully arranged over the years. Each frame told a story of devotion, of a mother who had given everything and asked for nothing in return. There was Daniel at 3, chocolate cake smeared across his face at his birthday party. I'd worked a double shift at the diner the night before, my feet swollen and aching, just to afford that store-bought cake he'd seen in the bakery window. "Mommy, can we get the one with the race car?" he'd asked, pressing his nose against the glass. I'd looked at the price tag. $22, more than I spent on groceries in a week back then, and said yes, without hesitation. My fingers traced the frame of another photo, Daniel's high school graduation. He stood proud in his cap and gown, holding his diploma high. What the photo didn't show was the 3 jobs I'd worked to pay for his college applications, the tutoring sessions I'd sacrificed my sleep for, the way I'd sold my mother's wedding ring to cover his senior trip to Washington, D.C. "I got into state, Mom!" he'd shouted, running into the house that day with his acceptance letter. I'd been scrubbing the kitchen floor, my knees raw from kneeling on the linoleum, but I'd jumped up and hugged him tight, getting soapy water all over his shirt. "I'm so proud of you, baby," I'd whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You're going to do amazing things." I'd never told him about the ring, never mentioned the extra shifts I'd picked up at the diner, coming home so exhausted I'd sometimes fall asleep standing up against the kitchen counter. He was 18, focused on his future, and I wanted to keep it that way. College had been 4 years of creative budgeting and small miracles. I'd learned to make a single chicken last for a week, to darn socks instead of buying new ones, to water down shampoo to make it stretch. Every month I'd send him what I could, $50 here, $30 there, along with care packages filled with homemade cookies and handwritten notes. "Thanks for the money, Mom," he'd say during our brief phone calls, always rushed between classes and social events. "Oh, and the cookies are great. My roommate loves them." I'd lie awake at night, listening to the empty house creak around me, wondering if he was eating enough, if he was happy, if he missed me even a little bit. The loneliness was crushing, but I told myself it was temporary. He'd graduate, get a good job, maybe move back to California. We'd have time together then. But after graduation, Daniel had taken a job in San Francisco, 4 hours away. "It's an amazing opportunity, Mom," he'd explained during one of his flying visits home. "The starting salary is incredible, and there's real growth potential." I'd smiled and nodded, hiding my disappointment behind pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you." The visits became monthly, then bi-monthly, then holidays and birthdays if I was lucky. But I understood. He was building his career, his life. I was just glad to be part of it, even from a distance. When he'd met Amanda, I'd been so excited. Finally, someone special enough to bring home to meet me. She was beautiful, polished, with perfectly styled blonde hair and manicured nails that had never scrubbed a floor or changed a diaper. She spoke about her job in marketing with casual confidence, mentioning clients and campaigns that meant nothing to me but everything to her. "Daniel's told me so much about you," she'd said, her smile tight and practiced. "He says you're very involved in his life." The word involved hung in the air like an accusation. I'd spent the entire weekend trying to make her feel welcome, cooking Daniel's favorite meals, sharing stories about his childhood, showing her his baby photos. But I could see the way she looked at my house. The dated furniture, the worn carpet, the kitchen appliances that should have been replaced years ago. After they left, I'd found myself seeing my home through her eyes. The chipped paint on the windowsills, the faded wallpaper in the bathroom, the dining room table that wobbled slightly because one leg was shorter than the others. This was the house where I'd raised my son, where every mark and imperfection told a story of love and sacrifice. But to Amanda, it was just old and shabby. Their wedding had been a small affair in San Francisco, elegant and expensive. I'd worn the same navy dress I'd bought for Daniel's graduation, freshly pressed and hoping it would pass. Amanda's parents had flown in from New York, discussing wine pairings and destination honeymoons with the casual ease of people who'd never worried about money. I'd sat in the front row, watching my son marry this woman I barely knew, and felt more alone than I had since the day my husband died. During the reception, I'd approached Amanda's mother, hoping to find some common ground. "You must be so proud," I'd said. "They make a beautiful couple." She'd looked me up and down, taking in my off-the-rack dress and drugstore jewelry. "Yes, well, Amanda has very high standards. She's quite particular about quality." The message was clear. I didn't meet those standards. When Emma was born 2 years later, I'd driven to San Francisco the moment I got the call. I'd brought gifts I couldn't afford. A beautiful handmade quilt that had taken me 3 months to finish. Tiny clothes I'd carefully selected from the nicest department store I could find. "She's perfect," I'd whispered, holding my granddaughter for the first time. Emma had wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, and I'd felt that familiar surge of unconditional love that had defined my entire adult life. But the visits to see Emma became increasingly complicated. Amanda had rules about everything: when I could visit, how long I could stay, what I could and couldn't do with the baby. I needed to call ahead, schedule around Amanda's book club and yoga classes and social obligations. "She's still adjusting to motherhood," Daniel had explained when I'd mentioned feeling unwelcome. "She's just protective. You understand." I did understand. I'd been protective of Daniel too. But I'd also been grateful for help, for family, for anyone who wanted to love my child. Amanda seemed to view my presence as an intrusion, a disruption to the perfect life she was trying to create. The pattern had continued as Emma grew. Birthday parties I wasn't invited to because there wasn't enough space. Holiday dinners that happened without me because I lived too far away. School events I learned about after the fact, if at all. "We took some pictures," Daniel would say, showing me photos on his phone during one of his brief visits. "Emma did great in the school play." I'd stare at the images of my granddaughter on stage, wearing a costume I'd never seen, performing in a play I'd never heard about, surrounded by family I'd never met. In the background, I could see Amanda's parents, beaming with pride, occupying the space I should have filled. "She looks beautiful," I'd managed to say. my voice thick with unexpressed grief. But I kept trying. I sent cards for every holiday, gifts for every birthday. I learned Emma's favorite colors, her favorite books, her favorite snacks. I knitted her sweaters and scarves, made her stuffed animals, created photo albums of our brief times together. Most of the gifts went unacknowledged. If I was lucky, Daniel would mention them in passing. Emma liked the doll you sent, but more often, I wondered if they'd even reached her, or if they'd been quietly donated to charity, deemed unsuitable for Amanda's carefully curated home. The breaking point had come 3 months ago, during what would be my last family dinner at their house. I'd driven 4 hours to San Francisco, bringing homemade lasagna and a new book for Emma. But when I arrived, I found Amanda hosting what she called a casual gathering with several other families. I'd been introduced as Daniel's mother, not as Emma's grandmother, not as someone significant. The other women had smiled politely before turning back to their conversations about private schools and vacation homes. I'd sat in the corner, watching Emma play with children I'd never met, feeling like a stranger in what should have been my family. When Emma had fallen and scraped her knee, I'd instinctively moved to comfort her, but Amanda had quickly intercepted. "Mommy's got it, sweetie," she'd said, shooting me a warning look. "Grandma might not know how to handle this." I'd watched from across the room as Amanda cleaned Emma's wound with practiced efficiency, applying a bandage with cartoon characters on it. Emma had stopped crying quickly, distracted by the colorful Band-Aid, but I'd felt the sting of that rejection for days afterward. Was I used? The question had been haunting me for weeks now, growing stronger every day. Had I spent 47 years pouring my life into someone who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat? A convenient source of support when needed, easily discarded when no longer useful? I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, seeing the woman who had given everything and received so little in return. The lines around my eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent worrying about my son's future. The gray in my hair marked the years I'd spent working instead of living, sacrificing instead of enjoying. Tomorrow, I decided, I would call Daniel, not to ask for anything, but to simply hear his voice, to remind him that I was still here, still his mother, still worthy of love and respect. But deep down, I already knew how that conversation would go. I'd become the woman who always forgot her glasses, who needed to be managed rather than cherished, who had outlived her usefulness in the life she'd spent decades building. The realization sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold and impossible to ignore. The phone call I'd been dreading came on a Thursday morning in October. I'd been watering the small garden behind my house, the one where I grew tomatoes and herbs that no one ever asked about, when my phone rang from inside. "Mom?" Daniel's voice sounded strained, distracted. "I need to ask you something." My heart jumped. Maybe he was calling just to talk. Maybe he'd realized how long it had been since we'd had a real conversation. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" "Amanda's car broke down, and we need to get it fixed before her work conference next week. The repair shop wants $1,500 up front, and we're a little tight this month with Emma's new school expenses." The hope in my chest deflated like a punctured balloon. Of course, he wasn't calling because he missed me. He was calling because he needed money. I can try to help," I heard myself saying, even as I calculated the impact on my own carefully managed budget. $1,500 was nearly half of my monthly Social Security check. It would mean skipping my prescription refills again, eating nothing but pasta and canned soup for weeks. "Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. Can you transfer it today? The shop closes at 5. "Daniel, wait!" I wanted to ask him how he was doing, how Emma was, if they might visit soon. But the line had already gone dead. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the phone, feeling something crack inside my chest. Not break, not yet, just crack, like ice under pressure. That evening, I called back, hoping maybe we could talk now that the crisis was resolved. "Hi, Mom," Daniel answered, but I could hear the television in the background, Emma's laughter, the sounds of a family enjoying their evening together. "I just wanted to check if the car situation worked out okay," I said, settling into my worn recliner. "Yeah, all good. Thanks again for the money." "Daniel, I was wondering, it's been a while since we've spent time together. Maybe I could drive up this weekend? I could take Emma to the park, or we could just—" "This weekend's not good, Mom. Amanda's got this charity thing, and I promised I'd help with the setup. Plus, Emma's got soccer practice and a birthday party. What about next weekend? A pause. I'll have to check with Amanda. You know how she likes to plan things ahead. I did know. Amanda's schedule was sacred. Her plans immutable. My presence was always an afterthought, squeezed in only when nothing else was happening. Okay, I said quietly. Just let me know. Sure, Mom. I've got to go. Emma's asking for help with her homework. Another dial tone, another crack in my chest. November brought my 71st birthday. I'd hoped, foolishly, desperately, that Daniel might remember without prompting. I'd left subtle hints during our brief conversations, mentioning how the days were getting shorter, how I was looking forward to the holiday season. The day came and went in silence. I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the single cupcake I'd bought for myself at the grocery store. A pathetic celebration of a life that apparently no longer mattered to anyone. The vanilla frosting had been too sweet, artificial, nothing like the elaborate cakes I'd made for Daniel's birthdays throughout his childhood. 3 days later, my phone rang. Mom, happy birthday. I'm so sorry I'm late. Work has been absolutely insane. I could hear the guilt in his voice, the rushed apology of someone who'd been reminded of his oversight. Probably by Amanda, who kept track of social obligations with the precision of a secretary. It's okay, sweetheart, I lied, because that's what mothers do. We absorb the hurt so our children don't have to carry the guilt. I'll send you something nice, okay? Maybe we can celebrate when things calm down. But nothing came. No card, no gift, no rescheduled celebration. My birthday simply dissolved into the long chain of forgotten moments that had become my life. December brought the holiday season, and with it, the annual reminder of my place in Daniel's world. I'd been baking Christmas cookies for weeks, the same recipes I'd used when he was little. Sugar cookies cut into stars and trees, gingerbread men with carefully piped icing faces, chocolate chip cookies that filled the house with the smell of home and love. I'd packaged them carefully in festive tins, along with a hand-knitted scarf for Emma and a photo album I'd made of our few precious moments together. The drive to San Francisco had been treacherous, rain pounding my windshield, but I'd been determined to deliver my gifts in person. Amanda had answered the door in an elegant red dress, her hair styled perfectly for whatever holiday party they were hosting later. "Margaret," she'd said, her voice flat with resignation. "We weren't expecting you." "I brought Christmas cookies," I'd said, holding up the tins like a peace offering. "And gifts for Emma." "That's sweet. But we're about to leave for Amanda's parents' house. They're expecting us for Christmas Eve dinner." Amanda's parents, who lived 10 minutes away and saw Emma every week, who were included in every holiday, every celebration, every important moment. "I could come back tomorrow?" I'd suggested hopefully. "Christmas Day is family time," Amanda had said with finality. "Maybe we can get together after the holidays." I'd stood on their doorstep, rain soaking through my coat, holding cookies I'd spent weeks making for people who couldn't spare 10 minutes for my company. Through the window, I could see Emma in a beautiful green dress, playing with toys I'd never seen before, surrounded by Amanda's family who laughed and talked and belonged in a way I never would. "Tell Emma I said Merry Christmas," I'd whispered, handing over the gifts I'd brought. Amanda had taken them with the same enthusiasm she might show for junk mail. "Of course. Drive safely, Margaret. The roads look dangerous." The drive home had been a blur of tears and rain. I'd pulled over twice, sobbing so hard I couldn't see the road. When I finally reached my house, I'd sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, unable to face the emptiness waiting inside. That night, I'd eaten a frozen dinner alone, watching other families celebrate on television, wondering when I'd become the kind of person who was excluded from her own family's joy. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, during what would become known in my mind as the incident. I'd been feeling unwell for days, dizzy spells, chest tightness, a persistent fatigue that made simple tasks feel overwhelming. At 71, I'd learned to pay attention to my body's warnings. I'd called my doctor, who'd insisted I come in immediately. "Mrs. Patterson," Dr. Chen had said, reviewing my test results with a frown, "your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and your heart rhythm is irregular. I want to keep you overnight for observation." Alone in that hospital room, connected to machines that beeped and hummed through the night, I'd realized that no one knew where I was. No one would notice if I didn't come home. No one would call to check on me. I'd finally worked up the courage to call Daniel from the hospital phone. "Mom? You sound weird. Are you okay?" "I'm in the hospital, sweetheart." My heart. "The doctor says it's serious." A pause. "Which hospital? What happened?" I told him everything. The chest pain, the dizziness, Dr. Chen's concerns about my condition. I'd tried to keep my voice steady, but I'd been scared. Truly scared, for the first time in years. "I'm sure it's nothing major, Mom. You've always been strong. The doctors are just being cautious." "Daniel, I'm frightened. Could you come? Just for a little while?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I wish I could, Mom. But Emma's got this science fair project due tomorrow, and Amanda's working late. I can't really leave right now." A science fair project. I was lying in a hospital bed, alone and scared, and my son couldn't come because of a science fair project. "Maybe tomorrow?" I'd whispered. "Let me see how things go. Feel better, okay? I'm sure you'll be fine." I'd hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling, listening to the machines that were keeping closer track of my heartbeat than my own son ever had. The night shift nurse, a kind woman named Rosa, had found me crying at 3 a.m. "Mija," she'd said gently. "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" "My son," I'd sobbed. "I called my son, and he couldn't come." Rosa had sat beside my bed, this stranger who showed more compassion than my own family. "Some people don't understand," she'd said softly. "They think there will always be more time." But I was beginning to understand something that chilled me more than any diagnosis. There might not be more time, and my son had already decided how he wanted to spend what was left. The next morning, I'd been discharged with a list of medications and instructions to avoid stress. The irony wasn't lost on me. The greatest stress in my life was loving someone who no longer seemed capable of loving me back. I'd driven myself home from the hospital, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and found a voicemail from Daniel. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you're feeling better. Emma's project went great, by the way. She got second place. Talk to you later." Second place. He'd remembered to tell me about Emma's science fair placement, but he hadn't remembered to ask if his mother was still alive. That night, I'd sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, and finally asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for months. When had I stopped being his mother and become just another obligation on his endless list? The answer, when it came, was more devastating than I'd expected. I hadn't stopped being his mother. He'd stopped being my son. The moment of reckoning came on a gray February morning when Daniel called with another request. This time, he needed $2,000 for Emma's private school tuition deposit. "The deadline is today, Mom, and our credit card is maxed out from the holidays. You know how expensive everything gets this time of year." I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone, staring at the stack of medical bills on my counter. Bills from my hospital stay that insurance hadn't covered. Bills for the heart medication I'd been rationing to make it last longer. Bills that would go unpaid if I gave Daniel what he was asking for. "I don't have $2,000, I said quietly. "Come on, Mom. You've always found a way before. Can't you take it out of savings or something?" Savings. The word was almost funny. What savings? The account I'd emptied to pay for Amanda's car repairs? The emergency fund I'd depleted for their last crisis? The retirement money I'd spent on gifts that went unacknowledged and visits that were unwelcome? "Daniel, I can't afford it. I'm having trouble paying my own bills." "What bills? You own your house and you don't have that many expenses. It's not like you're paying for a family." The casual cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. Not like I was paying for a family, but I had been. I'd been paying for his family for years, sacrificing my own security for people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient ATM. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can't help this time." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice cold and sharp. "Really? You're going to let Emma suffer because you don't want to dip into your savings? What kind of grandmother does that?" The accusation stung, but something inside me had hardened. something that had been building through months of forgotten birthdays, dismissed concerns, and casual dismissals. The kind who doesn't have any savings left, I said, because I've given everything I have to a family that doesn't seem to care if I live or die. That's not fair, Mom. We care about you. Do you? The question came out before I could stop it. When's the last time you called just to see how I was? When's the last time you visited without needing something? When's the last time you even remembered my birthday without being reminded? Another silence. Then, look, I don't have time for this guilt trip. If you won't help your own granddaughter, that's on you. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, shaking with an emotion I couldn't identify. Was it anger? Relief? Fear? All I knew was that for the first time in decades I'd said no to my son, and instead of the guilt I'd expected to feel, there was something else. A tiny spark of something that might have been self-respect. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Amanda. Margaret, I just spoke with Daniel. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Her voice was smooth, controlled, the tone she probably used with difficult clients at work, but I could hear the steel underneath. There's no misunderstanding, Amanda. I can't afford to give you the money. Can't afford it? Margaret, you live in a paid-off house with minimal expenses. Surely you can find $2,000 for your granddaughter's education. Surely you and Daniel can find it yourselves. You both have good jobs. The mask slipped slightly. We have responsibilities you don't understand. A mortgage, car payments, Emma's activities. We're stretched thin. So am I said simply. This is about more than money, isn't it? Amanda's voice turned calculating. You're upset about something. Look, I know we've been busy lately, but that's no reason to punish Emma. Punish Emma. She was turning my financial limitations into an act of spite against a child I loved desperately. I'm not punishing anyone, I said, my voice growing stronger. I'm just tired. Tired of being the family bank account. Tired of being ignored until you need something. That's not true. We appreciate everything you do. Do you? Because I spent Christmas alone. I spent my birthday alone. I was in the hospital with heart problems, and my son couldn't be bothered to visit because of a science fair project. Daniel told me about the hospital thing. You're being dramatic. It was just observation. You were fine. Just observation. As if my fear, my loneliness, my genuine terror that I might be dying alone meant nothing because the outcome had been favorable. I may have been fine physically, I said, but something died that night. And it wasn't my heart. Amanda's voice hardened. If you're going through some kind of crisis, maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist, because taking it out on your family isn't healthy. You're right, I said, surprising her. I should talk to someone. Maybe I'll start with a financial advisor. See how much money I've given away over the years that I should have saved for my own care. Margaret? I have to go, I said, and hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Then again. I let it go to voicemail. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the bank and asked to speak with a financial advisor. Her name was Susan, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a gentle manner. I want to know where I stand, I told her. Financially. I want to know what I have and what I need to survive. As Susan pulled up my account history, I watched her expression change. She was trying to hide her shock, but I could see it. Mrs. Patterson, she said carefully, you've made some very large withdrawals over the past few years. Almost $50,000. $50,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd given away $50,000. Money I'd saved from a lifetime of work. Money I'd need for my own care as I aged. Can you tell me where it went? Susan scrolled through the records. Car repairs, school tuition, medical expenses, home improvements, all paid directly to various vendors, and regular transfers to a Daniel Patterson. I assume that's your son? Yes, I whispered. Mrs. Patterson, at your current rate of spending and with your fixed income, you'll exhaust your savings within 3 years. Have you considered what will happen then? I hadn't. I'd been so focused on helping Daniel, on being the good mother, that I'd never thought about my own future, about what would happen when I was too old to work, too sick to care for myself, too poor to afford decent elder care. What should I do? I asked. Susan leaned forward, her expression serious. You need to stop the outflow immediately. No more large withdrawals. No more financial support for adult children. You need to rebuild your emergency fund and start planning for long-term care. But what if they need help? What if there's an emergency? Mrs. Patterson, you're 71 years old. You are the emergency. You are the one who needs help. And if you keep giving away your security, there won't be anything left when you need it most. That evening, I sat in my living room, staring at the bank statement Susan had printed for me. $50,000. Gone. Given away to people who saw it as their right rather than my sacrifice. My phone had been ringing all afternoon. Daniel, Amanda, even Emma had left a message, her sweet voice asking, "Grandma, why are you being mean to Mommy and Daddy?" They'd brought Emma into it, used her innocence as a weapon against me. I picked up the phone and dialed Daniel's number. "Mom, thank God. We need to talk. Amanda says you're having some kind of breakdown." "I'm not having a breakdown," I said calmly. "I'm having a revelation." "What's that supposed to mean?" "I went to the bank today. Do you know how much money I've given you over the years?" Silence. $50,000, Daniel. $50,000 that I'll never see again. Money I should have saved for my own future. "Mom, we never asked you to." "Yes, you did. Every month, every crisis, every emergency. You asked and I gave because that's what mothers do. But I'm done." "You're done?" His voice was incredulous. "Done with what? With being a grandmother? With being part of this family? I'm done being treated like a credit card with a heartbeat. I'm done being ignored until you need something. I'm done making myself small so you can feel big. This isn't like you, Mom. You're not selfish. You've never been selfish." "Maybe I should have been," I said. "Maybe if I'd been a little more selfish, I'd have enough money for my own care. Maybe if I'd been a little more selfish, you'd have learned to solve your own problems." "So that's it? You're just going to abandon us?" "I'm not abandoning you. I'm saving myself." There was a long pause. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was different, harder. "Fine. Don't help with Emma's school. But don't expect us to come running when you need us. Don't expect us to take care of you when you're old and sick and alone." The threat hung between us like a sword. "I don't expect anything from you anymore," I said quietly. "That's what I've learned. Expectations only lead to disappointment." I hung up and turned off my phone. For the first time in decades, the silence in my house didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. The morning after I hung up on Daniel, I woke up to something I hadn't experienced in years. A full night's sleep. No anxiety dreams about unpaid bills or family emergencies. No lying awake wondering if I'd done enough, given enough, sacrificed enough. For the first time in decades, I'd slept through the night without the weight of everyone else's problems pressing down on my chest. I made myself coffee. Real coffee. Not the instant kind I'd been buying to save money, and sat at my kitchen table as the sun streamed through the windows. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if saying no to Daniel had lifted some invisible burden from the very walls. My phone sat silent on the counter. I'd turned it back on an hour ago, expecting a barrage of missed calls and angry voicemails. Instead, there was nothing. The silence that had once terrified me now felt like a gift. I opened my laptop and did something I hadn't done in years. I looked up activities for seniors in Bakersfield. The screen filled with options I'd never considered. Book clubs, walking groups, art classes, volunteer opportunities. There was a whole world of possibilities that had been invisible to me while I was focused on being the family's perpetual rescuer. The Bakersfield Senior Center was offering a watercolor painting class every Wednesday morning. I'd loved art in high school, before marriage and motherhood had consumed every spare moment. I stared at the class description, remembering the girl I'd been at 17, sketching in the margins of my notebooks, dreaming of art school before practical concerns had taken over. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. "Senior Center. This is Joyce. Hi, I'm interested in the watercolor class." "Wonderful. We have space available. Have you painted before?" "Not in about 50 years, I said, surprising myself with a laugh. "Even better. We love beginners. Can you join us this Wednesday?" Wednesday. 2 days away. I tried to remember if I had any obligations, any family crisis that might require my attention, but my calendar was empty, blissfully, completely empty. "Yes," I said, "I'll be there." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to remember the last time I'd done something just for myself. Not for Daniel, not for Emma, not even for my late husband, just for me. I couldn't remember. That afternoon, I drove to the art supply store. The smell of paper and paint brought back memories I'd thought were lost forever. I bought a small set of watercolors, brushes, and a pad of paper. The total was $43, less than I'd spent on gas driving to San Francisco to visit family members who barely tolerated my presence. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. For the first time in years, I shopped for myself. I bought salmon instead of ground beef, fresh strawberries instead of canned fruit, the good olive oil instead of the cheap vegetable oil. I wandered the aisles slowly, reading labels, choosing things I actually wanted to eat rather than calculating the cheapest way to fill my stomach. At the checkout, the total was higher than my usual grocery bill, but I didn't panic. I didn't start mentally calculating whether I could afford my medications this month. I simply paid for food that would nourish me, not just sustain me. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, but I felt more energetic than I had in months. I dressed carefully, not in the faded clothes I'd grown accustomed to, but in a blue sweater I'd bought years ago and never worn because it felt too nice for everyday life. The senior center was a welcoming building with large windows and comfortable seating areas. Joyce turned out to be a woman about my age with silver hair and paint-stained fingers. She greeted me with genuine warmth. "You must be Margaret. I'm so glad you decided to join us." The watercolor class was small, 6 women and 2 men, all of us tentatively holding brushes like foreign objects. Our instructor, Maria, was a retired art teacher with infinite patience and infectious enthusiasm. "There are no mistakes in watercolor," she said, demonstrating a simple wash technique. "Only happy accidents that become part of the beauty." I found myself thinking about Daniel as I watched the paint flow across the paper. All those years, I'd been trying to create a perfect family picture, carefully controlling every stroke, panicking when things didn't go according to plan. But maybe Maria was right. Maybe the imperfections were part of the beauty. My first painting was terrible. A wobbly landscape that looked like it had been created by a child. But I'd made it. With my own hands, for my own pleasure. With no one to judge or criticize or suggest improvements. "That's lovely," said the woman sitting next to me. Her name was Helen, and she'd been coming to classes for 2 years. I remember my first painting. It looked like a crime scene. We laughed together, and I realized how long it had been since I'd laughed with another woman. Amanda had never been interested in friendship, and I'd gradually lost touch with my own friends as I became more absorbed in my role as the family's solution to every problem. After class, Helen invited me to join her for coffee at a small cafe down the street. We sat by the window, watching the world go by, and talked about everything except family obligations and financial worries. "I started painting after my divorce," Helen confided. "I was 68 years old, and I suddenly didn't know who I was without a husband to take care of. The art helped me remember. Remember what? That I was someone before I became a wife and mother. That I had dreams and interests and a whole personality that had nothing to do with other people's needs." I sipped my coffee, real coffee, in a real cafe with a new friend, and felt something stirring inside me that I'd thought was dead. That evening, I set up my art supplies on the kitchen table and painted again. This time, I didn't try to create a recognizable landscape. I just let the colors flow, watching them blend and separate, creating something that was purely mine. My phone rang while I was washing my brushes. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I looked at it for a long moment, then let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to the message. "Mom, we need to talk. Amanda thinks you're having some kind of crisis. Look, I know we've had our differences, but this isn't like you. Call me back." I deleted the message without responding. The next morning, I woke up with an idea. I called my doctor's office and made an appointment for a full physical. It had been 2 years since my last checkup. I'd been too busy worrying about everyone else's health to focus on my own. Dr. Chen was pleased to see me. "Margaret, you look different. More present." "I feel different," I said. "I've been making some changes. The physical revealed what I'd suspected. My blood pressure was better, my heart rhythm more stable. The stress-related symptoms that had plagued me for years were improving. Whatever you're doing, keep it up, Dr. Chen advised. Stress is a silent killer, especially for women your age. Finding ways to reduce it is crucial for your long-term health. After the appointment, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called my bank. I wanted to set up automatic transfers to a savings account that only I could access. Money for my future, my security, my care. Certainly, Mrs. Patterson, the banker said. How much would you like to transfer each month? I thought about the money I'd been giving Daniel, the constant stream of emergencies that had drained my accounts. $500, I said. Every month, on the 1st. Perfect. This will be your private account. No other signatories, no shared access. My private account. The words felt revolutionary. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done in my adult life. I went to a movie alone, a romantic comedy that Amanda would have dismissed as mindless fluff, but that made me laugh until my sides hurt. I bought myself popcorn and junior mints and sat in the middle of the theater, surrounded by other people who were there simply to enjoy themselves. When I walked out into the afternoon sunlight, I felt like I was seeing the world through new eyes. There were people everywhere. Couples, families, groups of friends. All of them living their lives without asking my permission or requiring my financial support. I drove home slowly, taking a route through the neighborhood I'd never explored before. There were small houses with gardens, apartments with young families, parks where children played while their parents watched from benches. All of this life had been happening around me while I'd been focused on the narrow world of family obligation. That evening, I called Helen from my watercolor class. I know this might sound silly, I said, but I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime. Maybe try that new Italian place on Chester Avenue. I'd love to, she said immediately. How about Friday night? Friday night. When I would normally be sitting at home, hoping Daniel might call, waiting for whatever crisis would require my attention next. Friday night sounds perfect, I said. After I hung up, I looked around my house with new eyes. It was modest, but comfortable, paid for with decades of hard work. It was mine. The furniture might be outdated, the carpet might be worn, but it was my sanctuary, not just a place where I waited to be useful to others. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, behind the practical clothes I'd worn for years, I found dresses I'd forgotten I owned. Bright colors, flattering cuts, clothes that made me feel like a woman rather than just a mother or grandmother. I pulled out a green dress I'd bought for a wedding years ago and never worn since. It still fit, still made me feel attractive and confident. I hung it on the front of the closet where I could see it. Tomorrow, I decided, I would wear green. I would paint with watercolors. I would have coffee with a friend. I would live a life that was mine. For the first time in decades, I went to bed excited about tomorrow. Not worried about who might need me, not anxious about what crisis might arise, but genuinely excited about what I might discover about myself. The silence in my house had transformed from loneliness into possibility, and I was finally ready to embrace it. 3 weeks into my new life, Daniel showed up at my door unannounced. I was in my kitchen, arranging the daffodils I'd bought for myself at the farmer's market, when I heard the familiar sound of his car in the driveway. My stomach clenched automatically, the old response to his presence, but I forced myself to breathe deeply. I was wearing the green dress I'd rediscovered in my closet, and my hair was styled differently after Helen had convinced me to try a new salon. I looked like the woman I'd been before I'd forgotten she existed. The knock was sharp, impatient. Through the window, I could see Daniel pacing on my porch, Amanda beside him holding Emma's hand. They'd brought Emma. Of course they had. They knew I couldn't resist my granddaughter. I opened the door slowly, taking in their faces. Daniel looked haggard, like he hadn't been sleeping well. Amanda's expression was carefully controlled, but I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. Emma looked confused, clutching a drawing she'd made. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "We need to talk. You can't just ignore us forever." "I'm not ignoring you," I said calmly. "I'm choosing not to respond to demands for money. This isn't about money. Amanda interjected, though we all knew it was. This is about family. About Emma growing up knowing her grandmother. Emma stepped forward, holding out her drawing. I made this for you, Grandma. It's our family. I took the picture with shaking hands. It showed stick figures of Daniel, Amanda, and Emma, all holding hands in front of a house. Off to the side, separate and alone, was another figure, labeled Grandma. Even in an 8-year-old's drawing, my isolation was visible. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I said, kneeling to Emma's level. Thank you. Mommy says you're mad at us, Emma said, her voice small and worried. Are you mad at me too? The question was a knife to my heart. I looked up at Amanda, who had the grace to look slightly ashamed. I'm not mad at you, Emma. I could never be mad at you. Then why don't you visit anymore? Why don't you answer when Daddy calls? I looked at Daniel, who was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out, I said carefully. That doesn't mean we love each other any less. Can I see your house? Emma asked. I want to see your room. Before I could answer, she was pushing past me into the living room. Daniel and Amanda followed, and suddenly my peaceful sanctuary was invaded by the chaos I'd been trying to escape. Emma ran to the kitchen table, where my watercolor supplies were still set up from my morning painting session. What's this, Grandma? Did you paint this? I'd been working on a landscape, mountains and sky in soft blues and greens. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. Yes, I did, I said, expecting the usual dismissive response. It's beautiful, Emma said, her eyes wide with genuine admiration. Can you teach me? Before I could answer, Amanda spoke. Emma, don't touch those. They're probably expensive. They're not expensive, I said quietly. And she can touch them if she wants to. The tension in the room was palpable. Daniel was looking around my house with new eyes, taking in the fresh flowers, the art supplies, the small changes I'd made to create a space that felt more like home and less like a waiting room. You look different, he said finally. I feel different. Is this because of what happened with the school money? Because we figured it out? Emma got a partial scholarship. Good, I said. I'm glad you were able to handle it yourselves. Amanda's carefully controlled facade cracked. Handle it ourselves? Do you know what we had to do? Daniel worked overtime for 3 weeks. I had to borrow money from my parents. We barely made the deadline. You did what responsible adults do, I said. You solved your own problems. With great difficulty, Amanda snapped. Difficulty that could have been avoided if you'd just helped like you always do. Like I always did, I corrected. But not anymore. Daniel stepped forward, his voice rising. What is wrong with you? You're acting like a completely different person. This isn't the mother I know. The mother you knew was killing herself trying to make everyone else happy, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The mother you knew was so afraid of losing your love that she gave you everything she had, even when it hurt her. We never asked you to. Yes, you did. The words came out louder than I'd intended, and Emma looked up from the art supplies with frightened eyes. I took a deep breath, lowering my voice. You asked every month, every crisis, every emergency, and I gave because I thought that's what love meant. It is what love means, Amanda said coldly. Family takes care of family. Family sacrifices for each other. No, I said, feeling something shift inside me. Love means wanting what's best for someone even if it's hard. Love means teaching your children to be independent, not dependent. Love means respect and consideration, not just taking until there's nothing left. So you're just going to abandon us? Daniel's voice cracked slightly. Abandon Emma? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm saving myself. From what? Amanda demanded. From being loved? From being needed? From being used? I said quietly. From being reduced to nothing more than a source of money and unpaid labor. That's not fair, Daniel said. We do love you. When? I asked. When did you last show me love that didn't involve asking for something? When did you last call just to hear my voice? When did you last visit without needing money or babysitting or crisis management? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. I was in the hospital, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I was scared and alone and I called you. Do you remember what you said? Daniel's face flushed. Mom, I explained about that. Emma's project was more important than your mother's health. Yes, I remember. You're being dramatic, Amanda said. It was just observation. You were fine. I was fine physically, I said. But emotionally? I was dying. I was disappearing, piece by piece. And the people I loved most in the world didn't even notice. Emma had been listening to our conversation with growing distress. Now she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I notice you, Grandma. I love you. I knelt beside her, taking her small hands in mine. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. But sometimes loving someone means teaching them important things, like how to be strong and independent. Like how Daddy taught me to ride my bike, Emma asked. Exactly like that. Your daddy could have held onto the bike forever, but then you never would have learned to ride by yourself. Sometimes we have to let go so the people we love can grow. Daniel was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Are you saying you're letting go of us? I'm letting go of the version of us that was slowly killing me, I said. If you want a relationship with me, a real relationship, not just a financial arrangement, then we need to start over, with respect, with boundaries, with love that doesn't come with a price tag. What does that mean? Amanda asked suspiciously. It means I won't be giving you money anymore. It means I won't be available to solve every crisis. It means if you want to see me, you have to actually want to see me, not just need something from me. And if we don't accept these conditions, Daniel asked. I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd raised, this person I'd poured my life into, who was now trying to negotiate the terms of basic human decency. Then I guess we'll find out if you ever really loved me at all, I said. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma was the first to break it. I love you, Grandma, she said, throwing her arms around my neck. Even without money, even without anything, I just love you. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her small body against mine. Whatever happened with Daniel and Amanda, Emma was innocent in all of this. I love you too, baby, I whispered. Always. When I looked up, I saw Daniel wiping his eyes. For a moment I thought I saw a glimpse of the boy I'd raised, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I need to think, he said finally. This is a lot. Take all the time you need, I said. But understand that I'm not going back to the way things were. I can't. It was killing me. They left without another word, Emma waving goodbye from the car window. I watched them drive away, then closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd finally told them the truth. I walked to my bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was someone I was just beginning to recognize. Someone with dignity, with boundaries, with enough self-respect to demand better treatment. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen myself, and it felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. My phone rang. It was Helen. How did it go? She asked. She'd known about Daniel's visit. I'd called her this morning, nervous about the confrontation. I told them the truth, I said. All of it. How do you feel? I considered the question, like I've been holding my breath for 40 years, and I finally remembered how to exhale. Good, Helen said. Want to come over for dinner? I made too much pasta and I could use the company. I'd love that, I said, and meant it. As I got ready to leave, I caught sight of Emma's drawing on the counter. The stick figure labeled Grandma was still separate from the family, still alone. But maybe, I thought, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. Maybe it was time for Grandma to discover who she was when she wasn't defined by everyone else's needs. Maybe it was time to draw a new picture altogether. 2 months passed without a word from Daniel. 2 months of silence that I'd once dreaded, but now embraced like a long-awaited gift. Each day without his calls demanding money or his visits requiring my emotional labor was a day I could focus on rediscovering who Margaret Patterson was beneath the layers of sacrifice and self-denial. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came changes I never could have imagined. My watercolor skills had improved dramatically under Maria's patient guidance. What had started as wobbly landscapes had evolved into confident brushstrokes that captured not just what I saw, but what I felt. My latest painting, a vibrant sunset over the California hills, hung in my living room where everyone could see it, where I could see it every day and remember that I was capable of creating beauty. "You should enter the county art fair," Helen suggested during one of our weekly coffee dates. We'd established a routine: Wednesdays for watercolor class, Fridays for dinner out, and Sunday mornings for coffee and conversation. "The deadline for submissions is next week." "Oh, I couldn't," I said automatically, then caught myself. That was the old Margaret speaking, the one who made herself small, who believed her efforts weren't good enough to be seen by strangers. "Why not?" Helen pressed. "Your work is beautiful. And even if you don't win anything, think of how proud you'll feel seeing your art displayed." That afternoon, I stood in my living room, studying my paintings with new eyes. Were they good enough? Did that even matter? I thought about all the times I'd dismissed my own interests, convinced myself that other people's needs were more important than my own dreams. I drove to the Arts Center and submitted 3 pieces: the sunset landscape, a still life of wildflowers, and a portrait I'd painted of Helen during one of our coffee sessions. My hands shook as I filled out the entry form, but I did it. Margaret Patterson, age 71, was officially an artist. The changes weren't just artistic. I'd started taking care of my body in ways I'd neglected for decades. Regular walks through the neighborhood had toned my legs and improved my stamina. I'd invested in a good skincare routine, not because I was trying to look younger, but because I deserved to feel comfortable in my own skin. I'd even treated myself to a massage, my first in over 20 years, and nearly cried when the therapist commented on how much tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders. "It's like you've been bracing for impact your whole life," she'd said, working out a particularly stubborn knot. "When did you last just relax?" I couldn't remember. My house had transformed too. I'd rearranged the furniture to create a proper art studio in the spare bedroom that had once been Daniel's. His old baseball trophies and high school memorabilia had been carefully packed away, replaced by easels, canvases, and the kind of natural light that made colors sing. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was literally painting over the past, creating something new in the space where I'd once preserved memories of a son who'd grown up to see me as nothing more than a convenience. My finances had stabilized for the first time in years. With no more emergency requests from Daniel, my savings account was actually growing. I'd even splurged on a weekend trip to San Luis Obispo, where I'd visited art galleries and eaten meals at restaurants I'd never have considered when every dollar was earmarked for someone else's crisis. The trip had been Helen's idea. "When's the last time you went somewhere just for fun?" she'd asked. "I don't think I ever have," I'd admitted. "Every trip I've taken was to visit family or handle some emergency." Well, that's about to change. We'd stayed at a charming bed and breakfast, spent hours browsing antique shops and art galleries, and talked about everything except family obligations. For 2 days, I wasn't anyone's mother or grandmother. I was just Margaret, a woman who appreciated good wine and beautiful art and the simple pleasure of watching ocean waves crash against the shore. It was during that trip that I'd made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. I was going to travel to Europe, alone. I'd always dreamed of seeing the art museums in Paris, the countryside in Tuscany, the gardens in England. For 40 years, I'd convinced myself that such dreams were selfish, impractical, too expensive for someone with my responsibilities. But I was 71 years old. If not now, when? I'd started planning the trip as soon as I returned home, researching small group tours designed for mature travelers. The cost would require a significant portion of my savings, but for the first time in my life, I was willing to spend money on myself without guilt. The county art fair results were announced on a Tuesday morning. I'd been so nervous that I'd almost skipped my watercolor class, but Helen had dragged me along. "Margaret Patterson," Maria announced with a huge smile. "Second place in the landscape category for California Sunset." The class erupted in applause. I sat there, stunned, as Maria handed me a blue ribbon and a check for $50. It wasn't about the money. It was about recognition. Someone had looked at something I'd created and deemed it worthy of praise. "I'm so proud of you," Helen said, hugging me tight. "You should be proud of yourself." I was. For the first time in decades, I was genuinely proud of something I'd accomplished that had nothing to do with anyone else's success or happiness. That evening, I called the travel agency and booked my European tour. 3 weeks in France, Italy, and England. I'd leave in the fall, when the weather was mild and the crowds were smaller. I'd see the Louvre, the Sistine Chapel, the gardens at Versailles. I'd drink wine in Tuscany and take photographs in the English countryside. I'd live. The letter arrived on a Thursday, hand-delivered by Emma herself. She'd ridden her bike to my house, something she'd never done before, and knocked on my door with the determination of someone on an important mission. "I wrote you a letter, Grandma," she said, holding out an envelope decorated with crayons and stickers. "Mommy and Daddy don't know I'm here." I opened it carefully, my heart swelling as I read her 8-year-old handwriting. "Dear Grandma, I miss you so much. I know Mommy and Daddy are mad, but I'm not mad. I think you are brave. I drew you a new picture. This time you are not alone. Love, Emma." The new drawing showed Emma and me, holding hands, with a rainbow overhead and flowers all around us. No Daniel, no Amanda, just a grandmother and granddaughter who loved each other. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, tears in my eyes. "The most beautiful picture I've ever seen." "Are you really going to France?" Emma asked. "Daddy told Mommy you're going to France and he was angry." "I am going to France," I said. "And Italy and England too." "That sounds amazing," Emma said with the enthusiasm that only children can muster. "Will you send me postcards?" "I'll send you lots of postcards," I promised. "And I'll bring you back something special." "Like what?" "It'll be a surprise," I said, already imagining the perfect gifts I'd find for her in European markets and museums. We spent an hour together, Emma helping me organize my art supplies while I told her stories about the places I'd visit. She was fascinated by everything. The brushes, the paints, the canvases stretched and waiting for inspiration. "I wish I could paint like you," she said, carefully examining my award-winning landscape. "You can," I said. "Would you like me to teach you?" "Yes, but—" Her face fell. "Mommy says I can't come here anymore. She says you're being selfish and hurting the family." The words stung, but I kept my voice steady. "What do you think? Do you think I'm being selfish?" Emma considered this seriously. "I think you're being happy," she said finally. "And I don't think being happy is selfish." Out of the mouths of babes. After Emma left, I sat on my porch swing and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. My neighborhood had never seemed more beautiful. My house had never felt more like home, and I had never felt more like myself. The old Margaret would have been heartbroken by Emma's revelation about her parents' anger. She would have called Daniel immediately, apologizing and offering to change, to go back to the way things were. But the new Margaret, the one who painted sunsets and planned European adventures, simply felt sad for them. Sad that they couldn't understand that my happiness didn't diminish theirs. Sad that they saw my independence as a betrayal rather than a gift. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, scared, depleted, convinced that her only value lay in her ability to solve other people's problems. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I'd once known but had thankfully left behind. The woman I was becoming was someone I liked, someone who woke up each morning excited about the day ahead, someone who bought fresh flowers for her kitchen table and good coffee for her morning routine, someone who had friends and hobbies and dreams that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself, and it felt like coming home to a person I'd been waiting my whole life to meet. 6 months later, I stood in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, tears streaming down my face as I gazed at Monet's water lilies. The colors seemed to pulse with life, each brushstroke telling a story of light and shadow that spoke directly to my soul. I thought about my own paintings waiting for me back home, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel foolish for calling myself an artist. The European trip had been everything I'd dreamed and more. I'd wandered through the Louvre for hours, sat in Tuscan cafes sketching the countryside, and taken a painting workshop in the English Cotswolds where I'd learned techniques I couldn't wait to try. But more than the sights and experiences, I'd discovered something profound. I was excellent company for myself. I'd eaten dinner alone in restaurants without feeling self-conscious. I'd struck up conversations with strangers and made temporary friends with fellow travelers. I'd navigated foreign cities with confidence, solved problems independently, and made decisions based solely on what would bring me joy. The woman who had once been afraid to go to the grocery store without calling Daniel first had traveled across an ocean by herself and thrived. When I returned to Bakersfield, my house felt different. Smaller but cozier, like a perfectly fitted piece of clothing. My garden had flourished under Helen's care. My art studio was exactly as I'd left it. And my mailbox was full of postcards from new friends I'd made on the tour. There was also a letter from Daniel. I'd been home for 2 days before I found the courage to open it. His handwriting was the same careful script I remembered from his school days, but the words were those of a man I was still learning to know. "Mom," it began, "I've been doing a lot of thinking while you were away. Emma told me about her visit to your house, about the painting you won an award for, about how happy you looked when you talked about your trip. I realized I hadn't seen you truly happy in years, maybe decades. I've been angry for months, telling myself you were being selfish, that you'd abandoned us when we needed you most. But Amanda and I had another fight about money last week, and something she said made me realize how often we'd turn to you instead of figuring things out ourselves, how much we'd taken for granted. I don't know if you can forgive me for being the kind of son who only called when he needed something. I don't know if we can fix what I broke, but I want to try. Not because I need anything from you, but because I miss my mom, the real woman, not just the person who solved our problems. Emma misses you too. She asks about you every day. She started drawing pictures of herself traveling the world like her grandmother. You've become her hero. If you're willing, I'd like to visit. Not to ask for anything, not to negotiate terms, just to see you, to hear about your trip, to maybe start over. I love you, Mom. I should have said that more often. Daniel." I read the letter 3 times, then set it aside and went to my art studio. I needed to think, and I always thought better with a paintbrush in my hand. As I worked on a new landscape inspired by the Tuscan hills I'd seen, I thought about forgiveness, about second chances, about the difference between love and exploitation, between helping and enabling. I thought about Emma, who'd seen my transformation not as abandonment, but as bravery. About Daniel, who'd apparently needed to feel the absence of my constant rescuing to understand what he'd lost. Most of all, I thought about the woman I'd become. Strong enough to be hurt without being destroyed, secure enough to love without losing herself. 2 weeks later, Daniel came to visit. Alone this time, at my request. He stood on my porch looking older than his 43 years, his hands shoved deep in his pockets like a nervous schoolboy. "Thank you for seeing me," he said when I opened the door. "Thank you for asking instead of demanding," I replied. He looked around my house with wonder, taking in the changes I'd made. The art supplies that had taken over the dining room table, the travel photographs covering one wall, the blue ribbon from the county fair hanging proudly in the kitchen. "You look different," he said. "Younger somehow." "I feel different," I said. "I feel like myself." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd once done homework while I cooked dinner, where I'd paid bills late at night after working double shifts to support his dreams. But the dynamic between us had shifted completely. "I saw your painting at the county fair," he said. "Helen told me when it would be displayed. It's beautiful, Mom. I had no idea you were so talented." "Neither did I admitted. I'd forgotten I could create anything besides a comfortable life for other people. We talked for hours. Really talked, in a way we hadn't since he was a child. He told me about his struggles at work, his fears about being a good father, his growing realization that he'd been repeating patterns he'd learned from watching how I'd sacrificed everything for him. "I want Emma to be independent," he said. "I want her to know she's valuable for who she is, not just what she can do for others. But I don't know how to teach her that when I never learned it myself." "You learn it by living it," I said. "By showing her that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. By demonstrating that love doesn't require you to disappear." "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words heavy with genuine remorse. "I'm sorry for taking you for granted, for treating you like a bank account instead of a person, for not seeing how much I was hurting you. I'm sorry too," I said, surprising him, "for teaching you that love means endless giving without boundaries, for not standing up for myself sooner, For making myself so small that you forgot I was a whole person." We both cried then. The kind of tears that come when walls finally come down, when truths are finally spoken, when healing becomes possible. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we figure out how to love each other in healthier ways," I said. "You learn to solve your own problems, and I learn to let you. We spend time together because we want to, not because you need something. We build a relationship based on mutual respect instead of dependence. And if I mess up, if I fall back into old patterns, then I'll remind you of your boundaries," I said firmly. "And you'll respect them, because that's what people who love each other do." He nodded, understanding that this was not a negotiation, but a statement of fact. "Can I bring Emma to visit next week? She's been working on a painting she wants to show you." "I'd love that," I said. "But Daniel, she comes because she wants to see her grandmother, not because you need a babysitter." "I understand," he said, and I could see that he did. 3 months later, Emma and I stood side by side at easels in my art studio, both of us absorbed in our paintings. She was working on a self-portrait, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she tried to capture the exact shade of her hair. "Grandma," she said without looking up from her canvas, "Daddy says you're teaching him how to be brave like you. What do you think?" I asked. "I think he's learning," she said seriously. "He didn't ask you for money when his car broke down last week. He figured it out himself." She was right. Daniel had called to tell me about the car trouble, but he'd also called to tell me how he'd handled it. Getting quotes from different mechanics, negotiating payment terms, solving the problem independently. He'd been proud of himself, and I'd been proud of him. "Are you happy now, Grandma?" Emma asked, adding a touch of yellow to her painted hair. I looked around my studio, at the canvases covering the walls, at my granddaughter creating art beside me, at the travel brochures for my next trip, a painting tour of Greece I'd booked for the spring. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "I'm very happy." "Good," she said matter-of-factly. "I like you happy." That evening, after Daniel picked up Emma, I sat on my porch swing watching the sunset. My phone was quiet. No emergency calls, no urgent requests, no demands for money. The silence that had once terrified me now felt like a symphony of peace. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, afraid, depleted, convinced that her only value lay in her usefulness to others. That woman had believed that saying no meant she was selfish, that having boundaries meant she was unloving, that taking care of herself was somehow wrong. She'd been wrong about all of it. The truth was simpler and more profound than I'd ever imagined. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot love others well if you don't love yourself. You cannot teach people to value you if you don't value yourself first. My transformation hadn't destroyed my family. It had saved it. By refusing to be taken for granted, I'd forced the people I loved to see me as a person rather than a resource. By insisting on respect, I'd created the possibility for genuine love. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my social media account, something I'd started during my European trip to share my artwork and connect with other artists. For anyone listening who feels invisible, who gives until it hurts, who has forgotten that they matter too, it's never too late to remember who you are. It's never too late to choose yourself. You are worthy of love that doesn't require you to disappear. The responses came quickly. Dozens of women my age and younger, sharing their own stories of sacrifice and recognition, of boundaries finally set, and respect finally demanded. I wasn't alone in this journey. There were others who'd walked this path, others who understood the courage it took to say no after a lifetime of saying yes. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, I made a mental list of tomorrow's possibilities. A morning painting session, lunch with Helen, a call with my travel agent about the Greece trip, an evening reading one of the novels I'd been too busy to enjoy for decades. A life lived entirely for me, which had somehow made me more available for authentic love than I'd ever been when I was giving everything away. I'd thought saying no would make me alone. Instead, it had taught me the difference between being alone and being lonely. And for the first time in 71 years, I was beautifully, completely, joyfully alone with myself. And I was the best company I'd ever kept. Have you ever felt like you disappeared while taking care of everyone else? Have you ever wondered what would happen if you finally chose yourself? Tell me in the comments below. Your story matters, and someone out there needs to hear it. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is share our truth, so it reaches someone who desperately needs to hear it. Until next time, remember, you are worth choosing. Every single day.